Good morning.
Morning.
We might get a delay from Beaminster as they're in the sticks again. It's rained out there. The water's got in their copper wires. But at least we can see his wonderful face.
We've got new wires now. They've been connected. The new wires have been connected, Chris. It's all fibre now.
Oh. What can I say? Is it the fibre wires that are scared of David's voice, which gives us this delay?
It's still too many people just tuning in at the same time. Once the school comes online first thing in the morning, this will happen for the next hour. The whole town gets disrupted because there's such a boost for all the schools and things.
So when we have Deanery Synod Standing Committee this afternoon, you'll be clear as a bell.
It should be.
Excellent.
If not, I shall type it all into the message thing, and you can read what we're going to do, which is fairly simple, I'd have thought. But anyway, people don't know about Deanery Synod. After all, what is the definition of Deanery Synod, Callie? Do you know?
No, I tried to think.
It's a group of people waiting to go home.
I thought that was BCC.
You're going to read for us, Callie, from Matthew's Gospel, I understand.
I am. I'm going to read from Matthew chapter 4, verses 12 to 23. Now, when Jesus heard that John had been arrested, he withdrew to Galilee. He left Nazareth and made his home in Capernaum by the lake, in the territory of Zebulun and Naphtali, so that what had been spoken through the prophet Isaiah might be fulfilled. Land of Zebulun, land of Naphtali, on the road by the sea, across the Jordan, Galilee of the Gentiles. The people who sat in darkness have seen a great light, and for those who sat in the region and shadow of death, light has dawned. From that time, Jesus began to proclaim, "Repent, for the kingdom of heaven has come near." As he walked by the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon, who is called Peter, and Andrew, his brother, casting a net into the lake, for they were fishermen. And he said to them, "Follow me, and I will make you fish for people." Immediately they left their nets and followed him. And as he went from there, he saw two other brothers, James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John, in the boat with their father Zebedee, mending their nets. And he called them. Immediately they left their boat and their father and followed him. Jesus went throughout Galilee, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the good news of the kingdom and curing every disease and every sickness among the people.
My first thought reading that is how different that account is to the one we had last Sunday from John's Gospel of the calling of Andrew and Simon. Because it had Andrew as a disciple of John the Baptist, who, when John the Baptist said, "Here's Jesus," Andrew ran and went to find his brother. Whereas here we've actually got the both of them being called at the same time. Two different accounts of the same story that are quite different. And actually the Bible's quite full of that, and that's something we have to deal with.
I imagine it all happened quite quickly. So therefore, the exact order and how it was remembered, which order, who was called first and went to gather whom, sort of got lost in the blur a bit, because they were all, it all happened at pace. That's the impression I get.
I also think it's different people remember different facts about the same event. What's your thoughts on it, David?
Chinese whispers. Yeah, I'm going to say it's a bit like Chinese whispers, isn't it? The story's kind of retold one to another, and a little bit gets changed every time. We've all sat in that circle at training days, haven't we?
Yeah.
Where, you start off with Callie saying something, and 15 people around the ring next to me, I whisper in her ear to say, and she looks at me to say, I never said that. And I think that is the problem with the stories, that we receive them embellished, perhaps slightly changed by the individual authors because they come from different traditions and different cultures, but the story remains the same, and the message that we're hearing is important. It's about calling people to faith, isn't it?
And that sense of them dropping everything and joining in.
Yeah, and if you want to jump right to the end of any sermon we're going to do on this on Sunday, at the end is, "Unto you, come and follow me," and that's the important bit, not the method. It doesn't matter if it's follow me from a pew or follow me from a fishing boat or follow me from, I don't know, a football stadium or a cricket match. Just imagine David sort of putting his finger up saying out, "Oh, but follow me to church in the morning."
And you're right, Chris, and alongside that, the way that Jesus calls people in the way that they need to be called, quite specifically, he says, follow me and I'll make you fish for people. There's a sort of contextual sense of that calling. It was quite specific for those fishermen. And yet it's that calling is for all of us.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And I was involved in a Facebook conversation with a chap I was at college with 32 years ago. He seemed to think, and that's probably true. And he made some comment about how the Church of England has no idea about callings. And my input was that I've got sick over the last few years of constantly being told that clergy are the block to any growth in the Church of England. And that, his original point was that he just wished that he when he trained and when he was at college, he didn't believe he'd been called to be the CEO of a major company. He felt he'd been called to be a spiritual director of the communities in which he worked and served, which is what I've always believed. And my comment was, if we were allowed to do what we believe we were called to do, and to bring other people into that as well, and leading and developing faith, the Church of England would see growth. But they're stuck on one model, aren't they? Which comes out as if some of these central big churches basically around London, no idea what goes on in rural loaders or Powerstock, God forbid, Ypres or Simonsbury. We're stuck. We're busy trying to call people, but into a model that doesn't fit the contexture, the contextual arrangements or places where we live.
Well, I think it's trying to humanise growth. If we learn to be better managers, if we learn to be more skilled, if we learn to be better communicators, and all of this stuff, then we will grow God's church. Whereas actually, I think it's a bit more that, what, if we learn to be a bit more godly, a bit more in God's presence, we will enable God to grow his church.
There are some wonderful advantages to rural ministry of the church, often being, right in the heart of communities and the centre of a village and all the rest of it, and very embedded in tradition, local tradition that is super, super helpful when it comes to mission, and that kind of knowing people and generations of knowing people is such an advantage. And I think in the towns that can get lost So you probably do need a different model in different. Well, maybe it's not even about models. It's about being really specific to the place in which you find yourself.
You're absolutely right, Kelly. But we're not allowed in some ways to do that because we're always being dragged back to what is this. I don't like the word model. I think you're absolutely right. But those are the kind of terms that we use. And it was very interesting. I was at a meeting with the people of Tolop Quorum on Monday because we had a church a meeting that the church called with the community to see not interest, that's not the right word, what they were prepared to do in terms of supporting the church, because we're in the process of making a bid to the big National Heritage Lottery Fund. And if you know anything about those, you've got to prove that you've got community involvement and not just, oh, yes, we do the flowers in church or whatever. The community are really embedded in the church as well as other things. And we had this meeting, and there was 11% of the population there, so 40 people in effect, of which 2/3 of them were non-church attenders, but all saying, it's not that we don't believe, we just don't come to church. Or, it's not about faithfulness, because, we have our own way of doing faith. But, the attending church of a Sunday just doesn't do for us. But we want to see this place going because it's important to the whole ethos and living of the community around it. And the church loses sight of that, doesn't it?
There's something about serving people. How can the church serve the local community? And I mean, it was lovely just a few weeks ago, that Plough Sunday service, which because Andrew is off, I was asked to come and take, and I was standing in. It's not my service, I didn't devise it or whatever, but it was so lovely to witness that, and how that was kind of really contextual, really serving the local farmers, properly. And actually, obviously, all sorts of people, local farmers, contributed to that service with them in all sorts of different ways, the hospitality around it. But that's so important. How can we find imaginative ways to serve our local community in a way that is really core and relevant to them, and obviously expressing and communicating the gospel and the love of Christ and how Jesus serves.
Yeah, and I've always believed it's about presence. We're here. It's about being seen. It's about being active, and also I think the greatest presence and serving the community we can have is in some of what we would term as the offices, so funerals, weddings, baptisms, never turning anybody away just because they don't step through the door on a Sunday. We say, come, we're here. We're happy to serve you and to give you that special moment at a sad time, a happy time, whatever time it is in your life. And, that's what we do. And I think that's what the rural church does best of all. It's there for people when we need it.
I mean, if you think about if the Central Church loves the numbers game, if you just look at the number of people who come to church in each of our benefices over a period of a year for weddings, funerals, baptisms, just take those three, or maybe you could add on carol service or something. It's a huge proportion of the benefits. I had 40% of the population of the benefits come to a carol service.
And that's the thing, how we record the numbers, whether it's in absolute terms, whether it was 53 or 24 or, 105, or whether it is kind of what proportion. That's a very, very, very different way of recording numbers. And we go too much for the kind of absolute numbers.
Yeah. And it's not even about numbers or attending, is it?
No.
It's about when we've done something, whether it be a wedding, a funeral, a carol service, a baptism, just met somebody in church who's gone in to light a candle or to sit in the quiet. It's about how we've handled that, and how do we allow people to understand that, that for them may be their way of following me.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a guy who I did his dad's funeral this year. Last year now. I saw him last week, and he said, "Chris, I spent 4 hours in church Boxing Day."
Mm.
He goes, "You won't have seen me at a service." He goes, "But I was in your church." And I've had 4 other people say that they went in church and saw him there. He's a long way away from coming every Sunday. But because I've spoken to him for the last 8 years, he's happy to go and light a candle and sit in church, and he says his prayers. And how that will pan out, who knows? God knows his relationship with God.
And we have that massively in, I find it incredible that St Mary's, particularly in Bridport, just, obviously its location in part. So many people come in and on an occasional basis and sit. We've got one chap who comes in very faithfully and reads his Bible every week. He brings his flask of coffee and he sits there and he reads his Bible. And I don't think I've ever seen him at a service. I've had long discussions with him from time to time about, he said, "Callie, I don't understand this bit. How does this fit?" And we'll sit and we'll chat informally while he's drinking his coffee over a discussion on the Bible. Is that coming to church? We don't record that number, but
it's not recorded in the numbers. And I'm sure
it's his church.
If you became the CEO of St Mary's Bridport, you'd be sitting there saying, "I can't spend my time with one single person. That's not efficient use of my time. I've got to be managing the whole lot on all these other churches."
And how is that biblical?
And that's not biblical at all.
You see, I think
away the modern version.
Yeah, I think if we're not careful, and very early on in my ministry, I realised that I was very good at making presumptions about people. And when I used to do funeral visits, I used to think it was very important to find out if they had any faith or whatever. And I went to visit an elderly couple once who the husband had died. They were farmers, and they lived with their son who was now running the farm. But they lived in the back part of the house, and the son and his wife lived in the front. I was directed round to where the lady lived. And I was doing my usual questioning about, what did he believe type of thing. And she said to me, Vicar, she said, every night for our married life, my husband and I used to kneel on the floor and hold hands and say our prayers together.
Mm.
And I said, "Oh, very good." She said, "But can I ask you a question, Vicar?" She said, "The last few years, his arthritis was so poor, we couldn't do that. We used to sit together on the edge of the bed and on prayers. Was that wrong?" And I was in tears now almost at this point, thinking, how dare I presume to question anybody else's way of relationship with God? And I think, what we've all been saying, this relationship of the man who sits and reads his Bible with his flask of coffee, the man who spends 4 hours in a church, the people who I see coming in and out lighting a candle, or children who in the how dare we dare I presume anything about their faith? And come and follow me is to everybody, isn't it? It's to everybody. Because the message that we have is too good not to want to share. And that's the important. It's about how do we share the message and say to people, "You're welcome. This is yours." And I always say to particularly if I've been at the school or with other groups of people in church, this is your church, and I'm just the custodian of it for the time I'm here. It's yours. Come and meet Jesus here.
And I so share that passion of yours about, how dare I presume the open edge is so important. How God meets people is actually ultimately between that person and God, and the open edge, that open welcome, is so important, isn't it? The importance of, if we possibly can, having our churches open so people can come in when they want to come in. The importance of trying to make sure that people's access to God is as open as it possibly can be.
Yeah.
I just think how different this conversation is to when I was a teenager and did things like, I went to a big Billy Graham meeting at Bristol City Football Stadium, the football stadium full with Billy Graham preaching, and with a big altar call, put your hand up if you've now decided you're going to follow Jesus. It's a very different model of engaging with people, because that was very much it was obviously, if you don't stick your hand up or go forwards, you're not a Christian, you're out. And everybody the same's out until you've done this one act of coming to see one of their pastors and say a prayer of giving your life to Jesus. And I'm not saying either is right or wrong. I'm just thinking about how different that sort of model is that I grew up with to how we're behaving now as priests.
I mean, you're talking about commitment, aren't you, Chris? Yeah, the Billy Graham model, the model that we've seen in other churches, or people who stop you in the street. Have you been saved?
I am, and but what we're saying is, you going back to your elderly couple saying their prayers. Who are we to decide, are you saved or not?
I think that's the point I was going on to make, Chris. Is that, commitment comes in all different shapes, sizes, and ways, doesn't it?
It does.
And commitment for that man of 4 hours. Yeah, let's be honest. You or I don't probably spend 4 hours sat in a church on Boxing Day. Never mind somebody else. And that. Whatever he did and why ever he needed that, etc. That with his commitment to time with God in some way that hopefully helped him and helped him on his his journey of spiritual life or whatever it may be.
So I think some of the challenge for us as ministers is encouraging people sort of the next step. What happens when you do start taking up that call to follow Jesus?
Yeah.
How do we encourage people in the next steps? And it was interesting hearing Chris talk about that, the Billy Graham model. People make a commitment and to Jesus. So I suppose there's some strength there in that sense of, right, you're making a commitment. What does that look like? How are you going to follow on? Obviously, people connect with God in their own way, but how can we, as ministers, sort of encourage people on their journey of faith to whatever the next step is for them?
I think it's important to think about that next step, because I was often think about it as like concentric rings. If somebody doesn't come to church, well, get them to come to one service or a carol service. If they come to one, get them to inquire more about two. You'll never get them to jump from a long way away from God right to the centre very quickly. So I just work on gentle steps.
I've over the many years have begun to believe more in a Baptist approach to baptism, for instance. That a lot of families bring their children to be baptised, and we welcome that, and we don't discourage it. But how many of them we actually ever see again after that day? And then we expect a child to proclaim for themselves through a form of confirmation. I wonder if it's time for us to start to think that baptism is to us, I would hope, central to what faith is about. It's about making a commitment, as opposed to the fact that, well, you don't need to do anymore. That the children, we had them baptised. That's it, and no further connection with church. Whereas, we do all this work with schools, with children through various avenues. Your Forest Messy Church, our Messy Church, and toddlers and babies, and all the things we do. Do we use that to say, let's start the development and growth of understanding of faith, and then later on we ask for the commitment? I don't know. It'll be a forever ongoing discussion. But I just think that to expect a parent to make, or a godparent, because of course it's the godparents that make the promises as opposed to the parents, to expect them to then follow that through when the child becomes old enough to make the decision for themselves, it doesn't work, I don't think.
And there's something about giving people the opportunity to be involved in our churches, and particularly when churches have been, they're struggling and they've been holding things together for a long time, and they've been doing things a certain way, and they've developed a rhythm and they know that works. How do we make space to include new people who the Holy Spirit, blow through our doors? That's quite tricky. Particularly, I think, where people have been doing, roles for many, many years, and they've got a well-oiled machine, and things have been running the way they have been running for a long time. Perhaps
that's a question for us to ask at our clergy chapter meeting, and even perhaps to put on the agenda of a further deanery synod. How do we work closer together, Bridport and Beaminster, God forbid, and Loaders and the Golden Cap, wherever it may be? How do we work together to provide that opportunity to explore greater and further? And dear viewer, whoever many of you are clicking in and out, we never know. I'll have to check up with Harry again what the latest numbers are. He'll tell me. So you are back to numbers again, Chris. We're too worried about numbers, aren't we? Perhaps you could share with us what your thoughts are about how we go about trying to show or grow, not just grow church numbers, but grow faith in people that they want to know more. Should we call it a day, dear people, and all return refreshed again next week with a new topic?
Lovely. Really nice to be with you.
Bye.
Bye.